If one motor is enough, is 8 motors better? We're going to find out by talking with the builder of the most crazy electric Porsche that's ever been built.
No, seriously. As a gas car, this Porsche 911 won its class on Pikes Peak. The hill climb is known as the race to the clouds, where cars brute force their way up 156 turns to end at over 14,000 feet in the air. For this car, the only way to beat its own record was to evolve into one of the most unique EV conversions in the world. They tried once before in 2019, but weather defeated the run. The 2027 race is the next chance for the car and the team to upgrade the build and beat their gas record. Okay, now let's hear more from the builder.
Micah, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us today looking at this absolutely gorgeous Porsche.
No problem.
So I understand that this is a 1973 RSR. My first question is this an RSR or what is known as an RSR tribute?
Yeah, it's a tribute. It began as either 67 or 68 912, which is the smaller four-cylinder version of the 911 that sold. It was a fairly popular car actually when the 911 came out. You know, there's an abundance of them that were converted to race cars or they were converted to 911s in the day. And this one I think was done in the late 90s initially. But Chris Lennon and his team have put it together as a Pikes Peak hill climb race car.
This is actually a really rare view of a race car like this because you can actually see what's going on inside as it's being prepped for another run. But I understand that it has actually won its class at Pikes Peak and now it's being converted to electric to try and beat that record. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Chris Lennon and his team have figured out how to make the car handle, and they went through a couple iterations of internal combustion engine Porsche motors, gasoline powered motors, and ultimately won the vintage class. With the best iteration of the internal combustion engine, they were able to get into about 10 minutes 50 seconds or thereabouts. And so the goal here, by converting to electric, a prior winner at Pikes Peak, is to show that we can actually do better.
Could you take us through a little bit of the build, starting with kind of the concept behind the motors?
Back in about 2015, I had an old 912 that was my family's, and the engine had blown up, and I was looking at a pretty hefty repair bill or a rebuild bill. And I decided that as an employee at Zero Motorcycles, I could probably find a way to shoehorn the motor actually in that FX in the back of my truck into the 912 and electrify it, just put the batteries up in front. Yeah, it seemed pretty modular. I was pretty proud of some of the technology we had put together, and it looked like it would work. And then, you know, a few CAD files later and measurements, I actually did have a running 4-motor, 2-battery system in the 912 that I had purchased from my father. We used to do hill climbs and autocrosses, and that 4-motor car was more than I really could handle. And so I felt like, well, I better get back into some competition like I used to do when I was a kid. So I looked up Porsches that had done hill climbs, and I happened upon Chris Lennon, who had done the Pikes Peak hill climb in this car. And I asked him, would you like to try electric? And he said yes.
And he said yes.
And he said yes. So he came out and he drove my 912. He said it needed a bit more power, and so, you know, challenge accepted. Went and added 2 more motors to it and a 3rd battery pack, somewhere north of 30 kilowatt hours and, you know, 6 motors worth of torque and power. And that was enough for him.
And these are all the Zero motors.
That's right, that's right. This is a Cypher 2 generation of Zero Motorcycles powertrains. And 67 horsepower per motor, I think, is the capability there if we go back and look at some spec sheets. It was just a modular way to add more battery, add more power, add more motors to the car. What's interesting about our installation is that I chose to keep the transmission in the car. And now, of course, it's out now because we're doing some refinishing of this chassis. But the ease with which I could remove a Porsche motor, in my own experience, and then put in an electric motor unit or power unit was wonderful. I was able to keep the clutch, keep the shifter, and the experience of driving a Porsche was retained, and that just, you know, ear-to-ear grins. Every
awesome.
drive home and work in that car, it was fantastic. It was more than I could take.
Still had that soul.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Ooh, it peeled out. That was cool.
We did a couple runs around Laguna Seca in those different configurations, a 4-motor and then a 6-motor variant. and in a particularly wild run with 6 motors and the old 912 brakes, we got about 1 minute and 50 seconds going around Laguna Seca, which is pretty hot. And with solid brake discs, it was more than that car could handle. So I knew we had something that we could bring up to Chris. And so we ran this car with that configuration back in 2019 and got 3rd in class. But there's always more, right? With a modular style architecture, you can always add more. So now we have 8 motors in a brand new assembly that uses Gates carbon belts to transfer power to a central shaft with the Porsche 915 transaxle. And I think it's around 500 foot-pounds of torque and 500 horsepower out of the batteries. So it's a pretty good mover.
That's substantial.
Yeah.
So for people who maybe haven't seen a Zero motorcycle or a Zero motor, can we go and check out that bike?
Yeah, let's go around the truck and take a look at this motorcycle.
Kind of get a sense for the scale of what the motors even look like for people.
Sure.
Especially the modular component.
So this motorbike, this is my personal FX. Wonderful bike for trail rides, but it'll do north of 80 miles an hour on the freeway if you want it to. Great for following the kids around in a park. Option chain kit, so that's what mine's got, sand and rocks and things like that. I just don't want to have any issues there. The motors, the controllers, these are all modular components you can add and delete.
That's the motor there with the heat sink around it?
That's right. The controller's buried behind a protective cover to keep your fingers off of it. And these batteries do slide in and out of this motorcycle.
So would this be 1 battery or 2?
That's 2 different cell boxes that are called modules because they both have a battery management system, a contactor, a fuse, and some control elements. And then there's a vehicle control unit called a main bike board, which is what manages that the battery should be switched in or out based on their different states of charge. So all of that IP, all of that work that went into creating a reliable system has been duplicated in the race car times 2. There are 2 completely independent electrical systems in the race car.
Wow.
With 2 batteries each and 4 motors each. And this gives us an extra edge of reliability because if one system has a fault of some kind and cannot recover, well, the other system keeps going. So
that's incredible.
To finish first, you must first finish.
I have to imagine that the ruggedness and reliability that is necessary in a bike like this actually makes it uniquely qualified for a motorsport application.
In addition to power and energy density.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The lightweight components that have to go on a motorcycle, which is generally a lightweight vehicle, to be accepted by a market, yes, we get to capitalize on that with a race car using it.
Very cool. So let's talk back about this chassis a little bit.
Sure.
What is actually still original to this car? Because it definitely didn't come with a cage.
Didn't come with a cage, that was added. The floor pan, the sills, the metal framework for the doors around the windows, the roof is original. The windshield is a glass windshield. There's a handful of panels in there that mount the McPherson struts. There is a VIN plate actually over there by the bars. So it's a unibody that has been reinforced with a tube frame integrated into it.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Is there going to have to be any changes to the chassis, unibody, and tube frame for the next run?
We're doing a bit of cleaning up and repainting. It's critical that we know the health, I suppose, of our chassis. And so a big focus this year is to make sure that the chassis presents well and also has any needs taken care of before we go represent at the hill climb.
And we have just about a year to do it.
That's right.
A little bit over.
That's right.
Now, do any of the batteries go in the back or is it all up here in the front?
So, a great question. When I first did the initial conversion on my own, what was beautiful is that 2 of the Zero motorcycles batteries fit under the hood where the fuel tank was.
Yeah.
So just like the motor being a 1-for-1 replacement, pull out the Porsche motor, put the electric motor in, I could put batteries where the fuel tank went. And so the race car is also capitalizing on that in that there are 2 batteries here. However, for the hill climb, where we are looking for the maximum amount of power for the 10-minute or so duration of the hill climb, we needed more capacity. We're using thermal mass to our advantage here. So the passenger side of the car, the footwell and where the seat would be, there's another pair of batteries as well. So we're adding enough energy and thermal mass for the demands of the hill climb.
How about the overall weight change from when it was a gas car to the EV conversion? Did it change the like corner weights or the handling of the car? Did you have to reinforce any of the chassis with the additional components?
The chassis was modified in this front area, yes.
Okay.
We enlisted the help of professionals to do that with the cage itself in order to mount and also secure the battery packs, and that also goes for the passenger side of the cage. The reinforcements there were completed, but the car itself, with the suspension and brakes having been upgraded to racing spec or like a GT2 or GT3 Porsche components, can handle the weight of the motorsport rigger.
That was actually my next question, was what's up with the brakes and suspension?
Those are all things that, as you know, tend to be competition sensitive. And so, the team who manages the performance of the car according to the driver and the comfort level of the driver, that's another group.
Very cool. But it's not stock by any means.
No, but the configuration of the old 911 with McPherson struts and trailing arms in the rear, McPherson struts in the front, that is definitely the same.
Cool.
Certainly sway bars and other performance components, coilovers for example, those are in use. I'll tell you something that the 911 never really had. In the rules for Pikes Peak, you have to have, I think it's 110 or 116 decibel horn as the electric vehicle goes up the mountain. And so in years past, people have had sirens, or we had just a blaring, terrible sounding horn, but you knew the car was coming. And there's a bit of special sauce we're going to bring to the competition this next time, where there's going to be a bit of amplification of the motor assembly itself. So you'll hear it, and you'll hear the electric motor running. It won't be a wave file, it won't be something artificial. You're gonna hear the race car.
I cannot wait for that.
Yep, same.
I find that even stock EVs do sing in a way that you don't realize until you've driven one. And that sound is really evocative to me, and the way it must sound with 8 motors going up with that amount of load is gonna be insane.
Yes. It's actually a lot like intake noise. For the old 911s and even some of the new ones, they have like a variable intake runner length. And this car, when you're in it, it screams. It is so loud. And it allows for that emotion of driving to still come through. You still feel literally the sound of the torque coming through as you deliver more power with your right foot. So all of that is retained. It's really a beautiful thing.
Let's walk around to the back and see the other side. We've seen this side and the other side. One of the other questions that I wanted to ask you is around cooling. So are you guys water cooling these batteries?
No,
or the motors even?
This is a completely dry car.
Wow.
Save for the fluid in the brakes and the fluid in the transaxle. Everything out of the Zero Motorcycles package is air-cooled, and what we're using is thermal mass to absorb the waste heat that comes from batteries, motors, controllers, cables, things like that, and make it to the top. That simplifies greatly the design work necessary to put this car together. We don't have leaky fittings. We don't need to go and find pumps. We don't need to deal with current draw from pumps. We don't need to do switches. We don't need to integrate. You just put it in, add more power, add more battery, and you're on your way.
That's really impressive. And I imagine that by the time you get to the top, it's pretty warm though.
It's absolutely warm, yeah. Uncomfortable to touch is about 65, 70 degrees centigrade, and some things are uncomfortable to touch. Yeah, it is, but that tells you it's alive.
Yeah.
Really, it does. And you're in control, and you're using energy as though you would an internal combustion engine. You hear the sounds, you feel the different types of friction that are in the drive line and in the suspension and the tire screech, more so than with the exhaust that would make a bunch of noise. You're much closer to the machinery that drives you in this type of car.
Envisioning yourself at the top of the hill in an EV, there's one really important characteristic that this actually has an advantage, because the peak is over 14,000
That's
feet.
right.
Could you talk a little bit about how this actually, it may not be water cooled and it may not have pistons, but it does have something that helps it with this?
Well, the thermal management systems that we're developed by Zero Motorcycles for batteries, for motors, for controllers, to keep customers satisfied on the freeways. We're basically taking advantage of that here. We don't need cooling systems. We're allowing the thermal mass to, again, absorb the energy that's part of the waste heat of driving, full throttle as often as possible with this EV. And as you get closer to the higher altitudes, you don't lose power due to lack of oxygen, like an internal combustion engine car. You would only lose power if your system needs to derate because of reaching temperature limits, from a controller that reaches its limit to a motor that reaches its limit, or batteries. And again, our strategy is to simply buffer those up enough that we're on the margins and we hit the top right and hit the limits.
This is an amazing undertaking, and it's going to be a lot of fun following it along for the next year. At this point, what's the rough plan?
So we're rebuilding the car as you see it now to kind of clean things up, make it presentable, do a little bit of painting on the inside. We might get it wrapped in one color to help with procuring some sponsorship for the right kind of partner who may want to emblazon the car with their logos and be a part of this effort. We're taking it out to Colorado. Chris Lennon and team need to work on the tuning of the car. There is simply so much power that the brakes need to be tuned with a front-rear ratio that works. The shocks need to be tuned to kind of keep the car damped through the jumps, effectively, of the corners of Pikes Peak, which are like hitting the berms at a track, and you're catching air on the wheels. And those are the kinds of things where, abusing the car to make sure that there's operating margin anytime we hit a hill climb, that's where we're headed now.
Is there a specific goal other than making it to the top of the mountain?
We want to beat the prior internal combustion engine time. I think I mentioned it somewhere near 10 minutes, 50 seconds. And Chris Lennon, please forgive me if I didn't memorize it like I know you have. But we also want to beat 10 minutes.
Which is, that's a barrier that a lot of people are trying to beat.
That's right. Being under the 10-minute mark is a major accomplishment at the Pikes Peak hill climb. And I think we can get there.
Just looking at these tires, they are aggressive. You can tell that there's some serious power that needs to go down.
Some would say too much. But when you go over that limit, you have an opportunity to tune things back down. You have an opportunity to really think about what's critical for the right amount of traction that the car has, and you can focus on the finer points and the finer details of tuning of the car. And I think that's where we're at. We've proven feasibility. We've proven reliability. So now we're going to turn this into a rear racer.
EVs are often talked about with really aggressive 0 to 60 times. In its previous form with less power, was that even benchmarked, or do you care for this type of a race?
This is a good question. In the hill climb, if you come to a complete stop, there's a problem. So generally, where the race is won is in digging out of the corners when you're already at some speed, using the traction that you have to get up to an 80, 90, 100 mile an hour speed as quickly as possible, in the W's, for instance. And then also having command and control when you're in the high speed lower section. You really want to have that. So this car is fantastic in that it can deliver substantial torque from extremely low RPM all the way through its RPM band. And I think that's where we're going to have an advantage, is that we can continue to put the power down. We don't really have so much of a drop off as perhaps some other cars, or even perhaps the peaks of other cars. There's predictability there that gives our driver, Chris, more confidence.
I know that this is an absolutely gorgeous car, but to do something like this, like Pikes Peak, someone could choose any car. Why this one?
Well, man, you're almost getting me back to touching on some nostalgia. New cars are great. They really are. They're, top tier vehicles with great technology that are safe, transport you quickly, extremely good 0 to 60 times, and are enjoyable to be in. This is one of those emotional types of efforts that really tugs at heartstrings. Maybe for others it would be because they, love the 911 shape that has been, and it's still in production. In fact, for me it was being a 8-year-old boy, 10-year-old boy with my foot on my father's roll cage in his autocross car, sitting up in the seat to try and see over the dashboard as we negotiated the cones in a PCA autocross in the late 90s. That's what I want. That's what I love, that's what I enjoy, and I think other people would get a kick out of seeing such an effort here that really is melding the best of electrification from a fantastic partner in power sports, Zero Motorcycles.
Why now? In 2026, we're planning for a 2027 run. Why that year?
I think it comes down to demonstrating sufficient confidence in the car's chassis tuning, because we've reached such a high potential in power. We want to make sure that we can rein it in, both in brakes and suspension, tunability, and give the team enough familiarity that they can command the car in any instance. Yeah.
The past attempt in 2019, which
Sure.
was limited to weather.
Yes, half the hill climb. That's
There's
right.
much more logistics that goes into just getting there that morning. Is it like how many weeks before the actual run are you all going to be getting there?
Man, it is easily about 2 months ahead of time where people are coming in and out, and there are tasks being taken care of, from getting brake sets and wheel sets together, to ensuring that there's sufficient equipment on the trailer, procuring a tow vehicle if one isn't sufficient, making sure the team has food and clothing. All of those logistics, as well as sponsors, making sure that they have a good idea of what's going on here, and we want to make sure we include them in any of the efforts put together. But the hill climb also puts on full test days about a month ahead of the hill climb, and so we want to participate in those. Those are tire test days.
Wow.
And then the week running up to the hill climb is full of practice and qualifying, where practice starts at sunup, and then you got to get out of there so that the general public can come in and do their runs up the mountain. The last 2 months before the hill climb, and it'll be on Father's Day this year, and probably close to that for 2027, it's just so intense in those last April, May into June. We're just about a year plus ahead here, so we're giving ourselves the best chance to be prepared, because the win is in the preparation. The win is not in the day. Yeah.
I really look forward to following this build with you guys over the next year and seeing this car break the 10-minute barrier.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Micah, for walking us through kind of the starting point on this leg of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for taking the time to interview.